This episode of The Candid Frame is proudly sponsored by Fujifilm's latest collaboration with Frame.io Camera to Cloud. With this innovative integration, you can now seamlessly transfer your images or videos directly from your Fujifilm camera to the web using C2C technology. To learn more about this exciting development, visit fujifilm-x.com and click on Camera to Cloud. Being a photojournalist is about more than just taking captivating photographs. It's about having certain qualities that make a real difference. Curiosity is key. It's a desire to dig deeper, to uncover untold stories and unique perspectives that others may miss. There's also persistence. It's what keeps a photojournalist going, even when faced with challenges and setbacks. Finally, it's the willingness to ask those tough, unconventional questions that others might shy away from. That's what sets a great photojournalist apart. I believe that photographer Raquel Natalicchio possesses those qualities. You don't have to take my word for it, you just have to look at her photographs, especially the years of work focusing on immigration along the U.S. and Mexican border. Though she currently works as a staff photographer for the Houston Chronicle, most of the stories you'll find on her website were self-assigned, personal projects. These were stories she wanted to tell, and she didn't wait for someone's permission to pursue it. You can't help but admire that kind of passion and tenacity. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. So I'm excited to have you. I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. I just, was going through my long list and I said, I haven't talked to her in a while. And then I saw what you've been up to. I said, it's probably as good time as any.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be on there. I listen to your podcast all the time. So it's pretty cool to be amongst the list.
Well, you do amazing work, especially over the last couple of years. I wanted to start, though, with your beginnings, because I know that you got the photography bug as a result of an after-school program. But who was Raquel at that moment in time? Tell me about the girl that you were at that moment and why that program, your introduction to photography, why that triggered something in you.
Raquel at that time was incredibly creative, just had my hands on everything I could think of that gave me a creative outlet, whether it was painting, drawing, imagining music videos to songs and writing them down in a notebook. I had this deep yearning to create. And truth be told, I was also the kid that, the joke in my family is that I kind of came out of the womb with a disposable camera. And it got too expensive for my parents. So they eventually bought me a video recorder, but all I did was take pictures on it. And so at some point, they kind of understood that I loved sharing story, because I was the kid that also went to a different school almost every single year, traveling a lot with my parents who moved around a lot. And I had parents in different countries. So my father and I lived in Spain for many years, and my mother still lived in Los Angeles, which is where I was born. And so I would travel between the two countries pretty often. And I found that my disposable camera was kind of my way to share all of the experiences that I was having, because I was traveling alone a lot of the time. And so it was my way to be able to get in front of the TV and plug in whatever I had, taken pictures of on the camcorder, or be able to show my parents, just the journey in between the two spheres of my existence, I guess. And it wasn't until I slept over a friend's house, and she was taking after school photography classes. And so I went with her just to support her, just to go. And I remember the first time I saw my photos developed after just doing it out of pure fun and joy, and really not thinking that it was going to be anything. Yeah. But when I saw the image come through my brain and into a physical, tangible form, my world was rocked after that. And I was an obsessive human being after that.
So this is film. You're talking about the print appearing in the development tray. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just, and for so many photographers that I admire, that I've spoken to, like that moment of witnessing a vision come to life in a very tangible way is that aha moment. And that was definitely it for me as well.
So when you remember holding that print and thinking about it, what was the power that was inherent in that photograph? Because there are a lot of people who experience that and they think that it's nifty and that it's cool, but they lose interest after a while. But for people like us, it triggers something. And I've thought about it a lot, and I've written a lot about it. So I kind of have an understanding of why it became so important to me. But have you thought about it, and do you have an understanding of why that was?
For me, it was, this is like the only child woe story, but it was the first time that my inner world was really expressed in my spirit's language, like in my personal language. And I was able to share it. I'm not a words person as much as I am a visual person. And since preschool, I have remembered my dreams like almost every week. I remember at least 3-4 from a night. And for me, it was almost like a dream coming to life. Like my inner spiritual plane was now seen in this existence, in this reality. And that was kind of that spark for me, is that I can have an idea or a vision or a feeling and express it and have it come out tangibly to be able to share with others. And that rocked my world, because I've always had a hard time talking about my dream life, because it's not something that everybody is, well versed in anymore, or that, we're not really encouraged to share. Oftentimes we're kind of told that dreams are these things that happen to us to get, to work through our day. But I was having experiences that were, felt like, I don't know, like spiritual training in a way. And I realized that the more I paid attention to that and photography, they like work together. And so like I would, I was doing a lot of climbing buildings and rooftops and, going into places I probably should not have been going into when I first started. The streets were my classroom. I didn't really get trained formally for photography. I would just go out into the streets from sunrise to sundown, and I would come back just covered in dirt and all sorts of things. But then I was noticing that my dreams were actually reflecting and kind of speaking to those new experiences that I was having through street photography. So I would start dreaming of scenarios where I was like climbing more like higher or kind of pushing my boundaries. And then the next day I would encounter a situation in which I had to use that very same training, I guess, that I had in that dream time. And so it was feeding my photography, and then the photography was feeding my dream time. And there was this really interesting conversation that was happening between the two. And all I can gather is that it really is the language of your soul, of your spirit. It's not just capturing a moment, it's noticing a moment, right? Like out of all the things that are happening, this one piece of this existence was meaningful to me, and, wanting to share that with other people in a way that I could not verbally express, but I can show.
Why was exploring Los Angeles with your camera so critical for you to be able to come to express that? Because some people will just photograph what's in sort of their immediate vicinity, their families, themselves. But you were going out there, using virtually the whole city to create your initial photographs. And even when you started working professionally, why do you think that was important for you to sort of hone your skills and sort of develop your voice?
I think a lot of it has to do with really wanting to reach people and communicate to others. And I was really excited by being able to do that through photography. I almost feel like I was photographing not just for myself, but for other people. I was really keen on showing people from LA that you can get out of your car and it's okay. Like there's all these amazing things that are happening in between, where you are in your car and your car to where you're going. And I felt really passionate about that. I was cycling a lot at the time. A lot of the people in my immediate community were cyclists, graffiti artists, people who spent their day out on the streets every single day. And I really understood that there's a magic in that. There's a magic in just being in your environment and listening to it and following those whispers of the city, you know, like following the little white rabbit, if you will. And I really got to know the city in a way that I was inspired to get other people to go outside and to explore and to have those similar experiences that I was having. And I still feel that, like, even now, my heart's getting all
I hear it in your voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what part of Los Angeles did you live? Paint a picture for me of what it was like for you.
Yeah, I lived all over the place. I kind of lived in the South Bay area. I lived in East LA in different little parts of East LA. So like Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights. I also lived in Lawndale and like around Inglewood area. So like I kind of jumped around all over the place, which also I think really informed that curiosity, because I was seeing all these like mini worlds coexisting, because Los Angeles is such a huge city. And I wanted people to understand that LA is not just Hollywood. You know, there's so much rich culture in that city. And I was just dying to get to know more of it and to share it and to inspire other people to also look for it.
But I completely agree with you in terms of Los Angeles. Because I grew up watching TV and watching movies, and it seemed like it was everything that was west of the 405, and north of the 10. And that was the world that everybody saw. And I never saw my Los Angeles in anything that I would see until I was, an adult. And I think that's one of the reasons why I photograph where I photograph, or why I like to photograph where I photograph, because I want the Los Angeles that I grew up with, especially the people that I kind of grew up with and are familiar with, to be seen in my photographs. Because I don't need to go to the West Side and make photographs there, because there's enough imagery of that. And for me, it's important. And I think it is to you, especially because of the themes and the subject matter that you've turned to. When did you think that this thing that you were doing that was giving you so much pleasure and satisfaction, giving you such a voice, that you wanted to do, photojournalism and documentary photography? What made you think that, you could have a career that revolved around something that you had kind of just taught yourself to do?
It's two things, like two kind of major events occurred in my life that completely, directed me in that way. And one was within the graffiti community. I started hearing the same thing over and over and over from different people. And when that happens, I tend to really pay attention, because if different people within a same community are all saying a certain thing, then there's a common thread, and maybe a story is brewing that needs to be shared. And one of those things was a lot of the older generation graffiti artists, some of the legends of LA, like, Hex, Teacher, the UTI crew, they were all kind of wishing and hoping that the younger generation really understood the roots of graffiti and why graffiti is important to a community, not just to vandalize or not just to like get up on a wall, but like what's the deeper meaning behind graffiti? And I kept hearing them say this. And so little by little, I was like, okay, well, tell me your story. Like, why is it important? Like, tell me, because I'm a total outsider. So like, I'd love to know. And so little by little, I started collecting stories and started noticing that all these people came from totally different backgrounds, completely different walks of life, but they all ended up at the same walls. And they all had a shared desire to communicate to a younger generation, to nurture a younger generation. And so from there, I was like, okay, well, everyone wants this thing. Let's just put it together, make a book that's affordable and accessible, and let's just tell these stories. And and then I just did. I just made a book and like put it all together. And I spent a year following around almost 10 different artists. And just, if they got up at 3 a.m. to go paint on the train tracks, I got up at 3 a.m. to go, to go document, and I just kind of tagged along, and they opened up their world to me in a really beautiful, vulnerable, and honest way. And I think that when you have a shared intention and a common goal, even people like graffiti artists who are very concerned about anonymity, they'll open up. And I think that's also something that I've carried with me into, photojournalism, especially my work at the Border. Like, that project really showed me how even the people who you think don't want to be photographed, they want to share their story. And I think that it's building relationships was the most important part about that. Like, that was the biggest lesson I got out of that first one. And then I understood the power of story, because I saw younger kids reading these stories from like the people they look up to, these legends, and then really shifting their actions. And then again, it was like seeing film come to life. It's like an idea comes into fruition, into the tangible world, and action then manifests, and then it changes something in your very real world. And like, after that, I was like, okay, this is amazing. Like, just sharing story can activate people and motivate people to change. And that's incredible to me.
Was that the time when you were working and you quit your job so that you could just become immersed in photography?
Yeah, that's a good story. I literally just was like, you know what? Someone said to me, jump and the net will appear. And I never understood that until I literally could not take working in a coffee shop any longer. Like, the customer service was killing me. Like, God bless all people in the service industry. Please tip all of your service industry people, whoever is listening. Tip them well. But I remember I had $10 in my bank account. $10.82. I'll never forget it. And I just walked out of there and I told my manager, it's not you, it's me, like, literally. And I just said, I have to give it my all. Like, I have to really just trust that this is what I'm meant to do, because I felt it in my soul that this is my purpose. And I just left. And then I went, oh my God, what did I just do? I have no way. Like, no one just becomes a photojournalist overnight with $10 in their bank account. Like, what am I doing? And I remember calling my manager back up and I was like, please hire me back. I don't know what came over me. And she said something to me that I'll never forget. And she said, I believe in you and I know you believe in yourself. And so this is for you. It's going to feel rough, but this is for you. And she said, rejection is redirection. So I'm going to say no. I will not hire you.
Wow. That was a real gift.
That gift is the gift that keeps on giving to this day. And even with people I encounter who, feel rejection over certain things, and especially in freelance photojournalism, my God, you have to be comfortable with rejection. And those words have just rung in my head and in my heart ever since she said that to me.
So you got a little more than $10 in the bank. You got this idea that you haven't really completely thought out or figured out. Your boss is not going to have you back. What did you need to do in order to figure it out and make it happen and not end up in some other coffee shop?
Right. Well, just very serendipitously, I went on LinkedIn that night and I applied for everything under the sun that had anything to do with photography, including headshots for schools, anything. I didn't care. But I ended up with a job at Road Trip Nation, which is a PBS educational program that essentially they hired me as a motivational speaker and an educational speaker to go around high schools around the country and essentially talk about how you don't have to kind of settle for your circumstances, and you can really just take practical steps to achieving your dreams and the goals that you have for your life. So we would go to very underfunded schools, tech colleges as well, like tech colleges inside of prisons in Alabama and in a few places in the South. And we would just talk to people and really give people the space to just say, okay, what do you love? Like, don't think about the possibility of it happening or not. Just what do you love? And then from there, what are the practical steps that we can take, that you can take to really like start that process and to essentially just break down these walls that may have been built around the possibility of achieving your goals. And in turn, it helped me really remember that.
You couldn't have asked for a better job, because if you had gotten a job, say as a photo assistant or working in a lab, you would not have gotten that kind of insight. Because there you're focusing on the very thing you need to learn and understand in order to sort of make it happen. Because even if you had gotten a job that was photo related, you could have gotten just as stuck there as you might have at the coffee shop.
Exactly. And it's a beautiful thing. I always say I used to teach photography to young girls in after school programs, like the girl that I was essentially. And I always say that I was as much a student of theirs as I was their teacher. And in that moment also with Road Trip Nation, I was motivating, but I was also being motivated. Just listening to people's dreams and having those aha moments of like, oh, like there are practical steps. And then I was like, oh yeah, there are practical steps for me too. And it's a really beautiful thing that happens, that oftentimes when we encourage or support other people, it's typically the thing that we also need in our life.
As passionate and as enthusiastic as you are now, and you were likely then thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to do. How were you standing in your way, and what did you have to learn to be able to overcome whatever obstacle you had created in your own mind?
I think the ways that I was in my way are actually still things I'm unlearning and untethering for myself now, which is, like I was not formally trained. I didn't go to college for this. So I've had to kind of learn everything as I go and be very humbled to the fact that I did not know what I was doing. I just had heart and drive, and I still do, but I had no idea how to go about this. I didn't know the business. I didn't know literally the first thing. I didn't even know what FTP was, I just went out there with a camera, and I've had some really beautiful people come into my life in certain moments and really help push me up and teach me these things. And then, I think it's something even now I deal with a little bit of that imposter syndrome, if you will, like I'm a staff photojournalist, like that doesn't ring through my brain yet, I just go into the newsroom sometimes just to sit there, just to watch it go by and be in it, because it's very cool that I'm able to push through without having to go the traditional or the classical route, but I still deal with it sometimes. I won't lie.
But, I think that's a superpower, because you don't know the rules, because you don't, follow some sort of rigid structure. It can literally be anything that you want it to be, anything you can make it to be. I think one of the things that's stifling about a lot of sort of photo education or education in general is that it's so strictly defined, and that people, regardless of whether it's photography or any sort of effort, feel like there's a singular way of being able to do a thing. And that works for some people, but for others it doesn't. And I think that if that methodology, if that structure doesn't work, it dissuades people from pursuing something that they're drawn to do, because they think, oh, I can't do it. And it's not, no, you can't do it based on that design. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you need to find a different way of doing it. And that's hard. Luckily, you weren't burdened by that to a great degree. You still face it sometimes, but I think that's the beauty of what you've been able to achieve, is that you're just, I could say that you're bold, but at the same moment I could say, she don't know no better. And both are true.
Yes. My editor would be rolling right now hearing that. And, I'm glad you said that it is a superpower because, it is true. I really don't know better, but I also I see how our industry is it's shape-shifting so quickly. And with good reason, it kind of needs to. And I do feel a bit emboldened to think outside of the box and to kind of grab, kind of media by the shoulders and be like, hey, this generation of photographers and journalists and editors and visual storytellers, we want something different. And I think it really does take a group of people who are bold and don't know any better that want to do better to really help that evolution along.
So what is it that you want to see different?
Oh man, where's the list? The number one thing I think is just building bridges between communities and the newsroom. I think out of the excitement of new media, we kind of got wrapped up in that whirlwind. And, the first thing I saw when I walked into the Houston Chronicle was this placard that they have. And it had a sentence that out of the bigger paragraph of the ethos of journalism and how it really is a service, a public service to people. And it really motivated me to want to create community engagement within photojournalism, right? Inviting people back to the round table, opening dialogue and conversation, being very humbled by the fact that we don't know everything that's happening in a community. We cannot know everything. It's not our job to tell people what the news is. I think it's our job to really listen to communities and say, okay, what are we missing? What isn't being talked about? Not just following the thing that is already being talked about, kind of like what you said, how you like to photograph the spaces that aren't photographed as much, right? How do we keep adding to the story? Because at the end of the day, this becomes our collective history, our collective remembrance. What the stories we tell now and collect now are how we will be remembered for years and years to come. And so it can't always just be tragedy. It can't always just be the big boom fire. That has to be reported and documented. But I think that we can go beyond that. I think we can work with people also to report on solutions that are being created, to report on how people are activated in their communities, to report things that motivate people beyond the issue that we're talking about and documenting. So I don't know, bring community engagement meetings into every newsroom, listen to people, more collaboration between writers and photographers, building bridges within the newsroom as much as between the newsroom and communities. I think just the relationship building that we consider as such a, part of the structure, I think also has to be carried out in our personal relationships as well. And that can be hard. I'm noticing now in corporate media, but I think it's really necessary so that we can really report and come from a place, from a heart space, right? A place of care and empathy and really doing the work for people first and foremost.
How did you try and do that when you were freelancing before you went to Houston and you were in LA?
Oh man, that's all I could really do because to be perfectly honest, nobody knew who I was. I wasn't really getting assignments that often. I mean, my biggest example is my work at the US-Mexico border, how it all started in Tijuana. When I went down there and experienced the encampment that was there for the first time. I didn't know how to pitch, but I gave it my best shot and I pitched and my little heart out to everyone, literally everyone about this encampment. But it wasn't about the tragic elements of this encampment where there was plenty tragedy to talk about. The story that I found that was like a light bulb went off in my head is how so many people from different countries came together to this one encampment, countries that historically have been very racist towards one another. But out of the means to survive, they all came together and began to work together to build a literal mini community /city. So the women that were teachers, they built a little school out of one of their tents. People who had owned restaurants, they built a little communal kitchen where, like Haitian migrants were cooking one day, and then Honduran migrants were cooking another day, and teaching each other the different foods that, were popular in their home countries. To people who had worked security, then were actually working security for the encampment. So like this little world was being made, and people were coexisting and living and working together to survive and to keep each other safe. And, it's not without its drama. It wasn't utopia either, but there was something really beautiful that I think went past people suffering at the border. I think that is what was happening, but then look at what came from that. And that was a conversation I was just dying to have and documented, but I got no response from anyone. But I kept going. Every other weekend I would drive down to Tijuana. I would spend as much time as I possibly could there to continue documenting. And frankly, that none of that ever got published, but it was important to me that it was documented and that exists somewhere. Those stories exist somewhere. And I think care is in the moment in that way where, we allow people to speak for themselves, to tell their own stories, right? Like I didn't know what they were going through. I could see it, but I didn't know. And so it was important for me that they told me their stories, that they kind of drove the bus, essentially. And then beyond that, I didn't just go there to get something from them, to get a photo or to get a story. I still talk to them to this day. I wanted to know where are they now? How are they doing? What are the challenges that they're facing now? So it's like, how do we continue to care for the people that entrust us with their heart, with their vulnerability, with their life, essentially, in many cases? How do we care for them beyond what we need in order to do our job?
Yeah, I think that's always been one of the things I've been very curious about with respect to journalism, because I picked up a newspaper probably as soon as I could read. I was always very, very curious. But one of the things is the whole issue about what story is being told and why. That going into, a community like that, as altruistic as the writer or the photographer may be, how much of their own idea of what the story is blinds them to what the story actually is. And it's hard because you're having to, like you said, they're there primarily to tell the story, the obvious story, the story that all the other agencies are telling. That's why you can pick up any newspaper or watch any, news broadcast, and the narrative is pretty much the same. You really don't see anything sort of outside of that unless they're doing sort of a profile on someone who kind of sort of anachronistic to the entire narrative. But it's like, well, where does the truth lie? Between those two. And it's hard because you don't have the luxury of time to be able to tell a full-fledged, a nuanced story. So when you go in, especially in a situation like that, talk to me about your awareness of that contradiction and having it to negotiate it personally, not just, to an editor at some publication.
Yeah, it's something I think about it all the time, every day, honestly, even now that, even for assignments, especially. But, when you said, how do I do that carrying as a freelancer, I think a lot of that had to do because I wasn't being paid 90% of the time to be there. Mm-hmm. All of that was coming out of my own pocket. And I was just there because I felt that need to be there desperately, to make sure that other side was also being told and documented. So even if it meant doing the legwork after the fact and trying to get that story pushed out after the fact. Because the truth is, there's only so much research you can do initially before you have to be somewhere and just listen to what's happening. I can do the Acuna story, for example, when there was 12,000 Haitian migrants that were trapped essentially under the international bridge without really being let in or out. And they were just there. And, every news outlet flocked there. Rightfully so, because I mean, thank goodness it was being talked about, because otherwise, like, who knows, like, how long they would have been there.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have that famous image of, you know, Paul Raje, a good friend of mine, that he took of the Border Patrol agent on the horse, encountering the Haitian migrant. And so I got there right as that happened. And I remember seeing everyone focusing on Border Patrol after that, right? Like, and to a degree, I can understand where it can be coming from a place of holding, you know, them accountable. But at the same time, if you see 20 people all doing and covering in this direction, we also have to be able to be there and listen around us and look around us and turn around and see, okay, what else is happening? Like, you know what I mean? And there is a lot of pressure from, you know, a news outlet, I think, to get the story. You know, like I felt it when I went to cover Title 42 with a news outlet. It was the first time I was actually there, like, with, like, for someone. I had always been at the border on my own, like, just for me. And I felt that initial pressure, but I remembered that the best stories that I got were because I was willing to turn around and to look the opposite direction and see, okay, like, what else can I add to the story that isn't being told? Because otherwise it's just like an echo chamber. And in Acuña specifically, what I remember covering, was I turned around and I saw how the city of Acuña in Mexico, the entire town essentially, like, shut down and went to go support the Haitian migrants, like, whether it was cooking, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, taking turns, bringing food, first aid, like, you name it. Like, people would show up with their minivans to let people charge their phones. Like, that whole city activated to support them. And when I asked this town, like, why is everyone here, like, in such, you know, show of support? And they said, because we know what it feels like. We've had family members who have crossed, who have died trying to cross, who have tried and cannot. And, like, they're like, we really understand what the suffering that they're going through by not having these basic things. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, was the story, because oftentimes we don't hear about Mexico really being there in that way, period. Like, I don't see a lot of news stories like that. And so for me, it's more important to fill in the gaps than it is to get the shot that, you know, is expected of me.
If you share my passion for creativity and believe in the power of artistic expression, I invite you to become a Patreon supporter of The Candid Frame today. By supporting the podcast, you not only ensure its continued existence, but also enable countless others to benefit from the enriching conversation it brings. Your contributions help create a space where creativity thrives and meaningful connections are forged. To become a Patreon supporter, simply visit patreon.com/TheCandidFrame, and you can support the show for as little as $5 a month. Your generosity makes a significant impact in sustaining this valuable resource for artists and creatives around the world. Join the community of Patreon supporters and be part of the Candid Frame's mission to inspire, uplift, and empower photographers everywhere. Visit patreon.com/TheCandidFrame and become a supporter today. Thanks. One of the images that I saw recently was of migrants crossing, and you were obviously in the water with them. Tell me about how that all happened.
I remember seeing people crossing and seeing, you know, them put their children in buckets to cross. It's a very small river, but the current is extremely strong. Like, it's deceptively strong. Like, people have drowned. So many people have drowned. And I remember being a little emotionally overwhelmed, to be quite honest with you, just watching it. You know, 12,000 people, that's a lot of people. And to see them essentially risking their lives just for bottles of water and diapers. And I became emotionally overwhelmed, and I remember sitting by the bank and not photographing. And, you know, like I can't force myself to photograph. And so it was important for me to really understand why I was there, why I was photographing, before I clicked that shutter the next time. And as I was sitting there, I remember seeing, you know, I had never met John Moore before until this moment. And he like comes next to me and he has this huge lens. And I was just like, wow, like I had a little 24-70, like that was it. Like I had one camera, one 24-70, and like, just was like, well, I'm going to do what I can. And he's there, you know, with a 300, like he could see the chin hair on a Border Patrol agent from across the river with that lens. And I kind of looked up and I was like, hey, can I look through your lens? And he was just like, sure. And I did. And I was just like, wow, like I wish I could get closer. And I said it out loud, not thinking that I said it out loud. And he's like, well, you could always get in the river. And like, as he said it, I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And I know he was kidding. And we've laughed about this. I saw him recently and we laughed about this. And I told him, you're the reason I got in the river. Because when he said that, I remembered, you know, that famous quote. I don't remember who said it, but you know, it says like, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough.
Close enough. Robert Capa. Yeah.
There it is. And so all of that kind of came to be. And I was like, well, guess I'm going in the river. And I literally did. I had got in the river. It looked like it was not as tall because I'm 5 feet tall, but everyone else was much taller than me. So by the time I got halfway through that river, it was literally up to my neck. And I was just praying to every god and goddess I know to not drop my one and only camera that I could not afford to replace.
Oh my God.
But so in that moment, somebody
well ahead of time.
No, not at all. He said it and I was like, you're right. I have to get in the water. I'm like, if they're getting in the water, why can't I? Or why shouldn't I? You know, like I'm not above anybody to not get wet. You know what I mean? Like, so I did. And in that same moment, somebody was swimming underwater and literally just came up in front of me. And that was just the one shot. It's, you know, one of my favorite photographs that I've ever taken, mostly because of the experience, right? Of like really putting myself in that space, quite literally.
Yeah. The images are so different from anything I've seen before that have documented that thing over decades. So they're amazing photographs. But how did actually experiencing what these people experience, you know, even though you weren't under the same sort of pressure that they were, how did having a visceral sense of what it's like to cross that river, how did that change the way that you see that journey?
I mean, I can't even say that I came anywhere near close to having an experience that they had. But just in the few moments where, you know, you do put your life at risk in order to come as close as possible to it. It's just, I don't know. I think I became more gentle. I wasn't just gung ho on, you know, going there and like, you know, I was very kind of like, I need to go there and I need to document and I need to make sure people know what's going on. And, you know, like, and when I got in that river, when I got out of it, there was a gentleness about it because I can't imagine having to cross 10 countries in a constant state of fear and survival and just it never ending. Even when you get into the United States, it doesn't end. Yeah. You know, many people think that just because you cross the wall or the river that, now you got your golden ticket, you're here now. But it never ends. You know, there's a whole new set of challenges, a whole new world essentially. And I think that having those experiences makes me approach these situations more gently and you know, like less extractively. And I just take my time, you know, like even this last time when I was covering Title 42 ending, I know I had a million editors and people just like, I could feel it literally. I was tethered to like a million responsibilities, but I just was so gung ho on taking my time and remaining gentle, no matter what pressure, no matter what I had to get. Like I did, like, and it's not that I didn't care that I had to get those things because I care very much about, you know, being the best having the best work ethic I can. But I just like, I will never make people feel like I'm there to get something from them after that.
Yeah. think the history of journalism has been, especially photojournalism, has been the role of documenting trauma. That whether it's the site of where a mass killing has happened, or fire has happened, or in this case, migrants crossing a border. The photographs that result from that are really dramatic. But I think over the last couple of decades, there's been some consideration for the responsibility when you are documenting someone else's about trauma, especially when it comes to trauma of people who are already marginalized. So talk to me about your concerns about that and how that impacts how and what you do.
I think it goes back to kind of a little bit of what I said earlier about allowing and really creating a safe space for people to tell their own stories. I think a lot of the times I've witnessed people coming in with a story in mind already that they think is happening, and doing everything in their power to make sure that they take that story back with them. And I think there has to be a flexibility to listen and allow people to really just drive the bus. Like I've said, I think that that's all we can do is just be there to listen and to share and to document. It's not really up to us to tell the story or to narrate the story. I think we're really just there to make sure that we're honoring people. And it's is how we go about it, right? It's am I just there to get a quote and then I leave and then, okay, bye, see ya, thanks? Or do I take the time to really sit there to get to know them as a human being outside of the experience that they're in right now? And, part of that is, finding something as simple as, just being like, hey, can I just hang out with you today? Whatever that thing is. And then finding out that they're actually volunteering in a kitchen at a church that is, where they're essentially getting supplies, and then just watching them feel joy from cooking for an hour and making sure that I remember and that I document who they are in that moment of joy as much as I'm willing to document them in their suffering. Because I think we have to see people more than just migrants or more than their circumstance, that they're full people with full range of emotion, with full range of expression. And I think that that's just empathy building is really important for me, because otherwise we're just going to keep saying the same thing over and over and over, especially when it comes to immigration. It's just the same thing again and again and again. And it's not getting better. So I think that really it's up to us to make sure that we're filling in those gaps. Who are they past the wall? Right. And, I'm working on a story right now that's called Al Otro Lado, which is the other side. I've maintained contact with a lot of the families that I documented at the wall. And it's okay, let's go beyond the wall. What is it really to be on this side? Mm-hmm. Asking the question, do you regret it? Are you happy? What are the challenges? Moving past the flashiness of the border wall and into the real humanity of the situation.
Let's talk about captions, because that's a critical component of photojournalism, and I think it's not discussed often enough, because as much as impact and effective as a singular photograph can be, or even a photo essay, those captions are really critical. And it used to be in olden times, the photographer themselves didn't write the caption. It was somebody back at the office. Now it's the photographers, responsible for identifying people and writing the captions. But it's kind of like Twitter. You only have a limited character count, only a certain number of words in order to be able to describe the photograph for the purpose of publication. Tell me about the challenge of learning how to do that and being not only accurate, but also being sensitive to the people that you're documenting in the photographs themselves.
I am still like, captions are one of those things where I'm still in the process of befriending. This whole AP style thing was just it was rough for the first few months, to be honest with you. I had mini essays, like quotes that were like that could have been, I don't know, articles themselves, honestly. And so for me, I guess it was just it was important to have people's voice within the captions, especially in those situations. Like, yes, I can describe the who, what, when, where, why, but the why really leans heavily on letting people really tell their own story. And I'm just super big on that because people want to be heard. And I think that anything that it's like playing the telephone game, you know, like if someone tells me something and then I tell someone else something, it gets diluted in the process. And so utilizing quotes in captions is a huge thing for me because I want their voice to be a part of it, because I think it's also more powerful when you read something that someone said and then you can gaze into their image. There's a deeper level of connection, I think, than just getting, you know, the facts of the situation. You do need that context, but I think it's also important to hear people beyond just the who, what, when, where, why.
Tell me about the importance of the community, the photo community. I know you're involved with women photographers. You hosted a couple of panels for them. Tell me about the role that having those kinds of relationships have made in terms of your career and the work that you do.
Yeah, I could say the word community 1,000 times, to be honest with you. It's kind of a running joke amongst my friends at this point. But it is very important because, like I said, not being trained or going to school for any of this, community was really like what held me, like the photographic community. Whether I was in spaces where it was obvious I didn't know what I was doing and people would come up to me and be like, hey, like, let me show you the ropes a little bit, or like, let me show you this or that. Or I have always felt incredibly supported by the photography community, no matter where I go in the world. Like, I could go anywhere and someone will show up and essentially host you through their own photographic community. And I thought that was really beautiful and really special. But again, in doing so, in being in a lot of conversations and building a lot of relationships with people, like any industry, I naturally started hearing the common threads, right? Where our industry wants to grow, how it wants to evolve, the things that are concerns, not just in the world, but for us as photographers within our own community. And when I start hearing things from multiple people, I can't help myself. I have to create something that even just sparks the conversation at the very least, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm a solution-oriented person. Like, I can't stop. I can't stop, won't stop. And so when I hear that, for example, in the Women in Photo panel discussions and now show that I've put together, it came out of just women talking and saying, I wish more people knew this, or why are we not at parity yet? What is going on? And so I think if we keep all that to ourselves, or just to one-on-one, it's good to have those conversations, but it doesn't activate. It doesn't create any change really. Yeah. But by creating panel discussions, or by creating spaces where you can celebrate those people, like in Houston, I had a similar thing. I kept hearing that people didn't know a female photographer in Houston, or they knew one. And I was like, that's absurd. I'm sure there's so many. Mm-hmm. And all I had to do was put a call out on my Instagram stories, and almost 40 women reached out to me in a matter of a week and a half. And so I was like, okay, I can't just let that be it, So I basically told everyone to send me some images. I got those images printed. We had a wonderful space called Wonder Like Wonder, who's also owned by a woman. And we showcased their work. And hundreds of people came out, and now people know there are more than just one or two female photographers in Houston. And that is just just on a bigger scale, it's just creating the spaces that you hear are needed, I don't know. I feel like it's buzzing all the time. If I hear people say, oh, I wish we had this, or I wish we had that. Okay, great. Well, let's come together and at least try something and just see what we can do. And I think that that's where community is so powerful and so necessary, because it really allows us to create things together that are for each other. And then, for everyone around us, essentially.
Yeah, because I think, and the quality of the community is really critical. That you have to be discerning enough to figure out communities that are lifting everyone up and others that are sort of holding people down. Because there are people who like clustering around each other and bitching and complaining about the way things are, and there's a sort of comfort in having those opinions and those ideas sort of affirmed by someone else, but it doesn't spur any action. So I think that it's important to find a community, but also realize that it has to serve a need other than sort of keeping things where they are and waiting for someone else to make things happen. But it's obviously, you don't hang out with that kind of crew.
And you know what? And I invite them because honestly, I really do believe that at the end of the day, people really they are either lacking the confidence in trusting that things can change and just need to see it from other people, or they just essentially need to be given a safe space to, get that brilliant idea out of their mind and into the streets, essentially, And that's where I think community can be very powerful, is that it really can lean on supporting people. Like we all have in our own minds and hearts right now, the solutions to the very issues that we are facing and needing and wanting change for. We just have to come together and talk about it, create it, support each other around that thing, and be okay if it doesn't work. And it's okay to fail. It's okay if that thing didn't work. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board. What else can we do? That's the biggest thing, is that I think that fear of rejection is it's so heavy in our community, because, people being ostracized and being, sent away and being banished for, messing up. It's very prevalent in photojournalism. Like, it's like, there's this thing where it's like, you're not allowed to make a mistake. And I think sometimes people just do, and it's okay. And we have to be able to create a space where they can be shown a way out of that mistake and how to grow and still be accepted by a community, Yeah.
Is that idea of sharing with people that it's okay to fail something that was part of what you taught and sort of encouraged with the girls that you work with, with like at the Lost Photos Project, that idea that it's okay to make mistakes and fail?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially that age, when you're in middle school and high school, you're so highly critical of yourself that any small failure felt overwhelming. Like it was like the end of the world sometimes. And I think the best way that I was really able to show that to my students was when I failed. I had a whole curriculum planned, but sometimes that, like, the girls just didn't want to do what I wanted to do, like, at all. And like, you cannot convince a room full of 13-year-olds to do anything they don't want to do. And so, it really was, I had to humble myself when I would present this whole thing and they just looked at me like, no, not at all. And be like, okay, I messed up on this. That's cool. Let's, and then in that moment is when I would say, what do you want to do? Let's create our day together. Right? Because then when we're learning from a place of curiosity, it changes the whole game. And so it was, I had to humble myself and not be that strict teacher that's like, we're going to do what I say, because at the end of the day, it's about them. It's about that. You can't force creativity. You can't force inspiration.
Yeah.
So, a lot of it comes from me failing at things and being like, okay, well, the grace that was given to me by them is what I try my best. I'm not perfect, but I try to give that grace to people in my life who who I maybe collaborate with, who are afraid to fail, or who do mess up, or I mess up. Like, it's okay. We just have to keep going. We can't be afraid to then try something new, to dream up something new.
Who have been the people in your lives who have encouraged that?
Oh, for sure. My parents. I mean, they basically consistently tell me nothing is impossible. There are practical steps to anything that you set your mind to. And because they saw I had very big dreams at a very early age, and I was just like, I want to change the world. And I still feel that to this day. And so it was really important. And I'm so thankful that I had parents that were basically telling me, cool, you're going to do that. But first take these steps. You know what I mean? Yeah, that was pivotal for me.
You've had the opportunity to meet some really exceptional photographers. We met some of them in Montana a couple of years ago. Like Carol
That was amazing.
is one of the standouts for there. So how has been seeing yourself as a peer to people you admire? What's that meant for you?
I'm still pinching myself consistently every day. I mean, I think it means that, I don't know, that my heart's in the right place, honestly. Like, I know I have a lot to learn. Being in the same room, sitting there with Carol Guzzi, having her look through my website, literally sweating bullets. Like, oh my God. And Montana was cold, but I was sweating. But like, oh my goodness. But I mean, also, seeing them up close and seeing how beautiful, especially Carol Guzzi, like I can talk about her all day long, but, really being able to hear their stories and kind of hear similarities, like hearing about when they failed, for example, or, John Stanmeyer has been a huge mentor to me. And I went to his workshop at his home in the Berkshires. And he does this thing that's really unique where he will open his Lightroom and go through an entire project's take. All the misfires, all the overexposed, all the, yes, even John Stanmeyer overexposes things. Like, I hope he's not listening to this, but really being able to see that we are all students and teachers at the same time forever. And that's something he really wanted me to walk away with, that, I think, really knowing that we're all just learning and growing and doing our best. And, some people have really put in so much work and have so much to give as far as advice and mentorship. And being in that room with all of those people in Montana was inspiring, because I'm like, okay, like this is achievable. This is attainable. Like I can really do the things that felt like dreams a moment ago. I've met the people, like they're still there. I can touch them. You know what I mean? And everyone was so kind and, again, very willing to share and give. And that's something that I see consistently in the photographic community, is that there are people that are genuinely willing to know your soul in order to help guide you so that you can create the work that you were brought to this planet to create. And that is, I think, so beautiful to me. Because
of, the internet and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and the impact that advertising on those platforms and how they've impacted newspapers and magazines. Most of the magazines I used to write for are gone. I think there's probably only one that still exists. And so people who had like this fire to become photojournalists, I suspect that a lot of them are telling them it's a dying industry. Go into public relations or go into something else other than that, because staff jobs are not out there, and you're not going to be able to survive and make a living. What's your counter to that?
People told me that for 6 years, and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And my counter to that is, I think that it is important that a certain way of life dies so that a new one can reemerge. I think it's really up to us, and especially my generation, to make that thing happen. Like, if we want to keep magazines and newspapers alive, we can do that, but it's up to us to do that, you know? And I think that there's potentially a reimagining of what that looks like. And with that, you know, a Renaissance era, if you will, I think it's just going to look different as things evolve. They look different, and it feels scary sometimes as that happens, as things are dying out and as things are shifting. But it also means that there's room for a new thing, a new way of doing that. And I do think it's really important to keep print alive, like extremely important, because if all the computers just go out, so what, all the stories go out too? Yeah. Like, we need to have some form of documentation that exists in a very real, tangible way. And I think this generation is going to come up with something really cool and really unique, and it's going to speak to this generation, and it's going to keep it alive. There's a lot of people that are passionate about it. And again, I just think it's about sharing. It's sharing these ideas, letting people know that we are keeping it alive, like to not buy into the idea that it's all going to just die out and there's not going to be any job ever again, you know, like, we make them.
Yeah, because just because the industry itself is struggling to sort of figure it out, there is no shortage of people whose stories want to get told and people who want to tell those stories. That doesn't change.
Exactly.
So it's going to find an outlet one way or another, which is one of the reasons I'm having to kind of reduce my consumption of posts and, you know, the noise that is just so negative.
Mm-hmm. I think that we can create physical spaces again. Like, it doesn't all have to resort to Twitter and Instagram, although I love Instagram, I'm not going to lie, like a wholly visual platform. Like, my God, like, yes. You know, I mean, it's a tool like any other, you know, it's like a knife. You can use it to cut food, or you can use it to murder someone. It's about how we use it at the end of the day. And really understanding that it's about how we use that tool. But I love that I'm experiencing so much of this in Houston, of people really keeping physical spaces alive, physical spaces for people to come together to witness each other's stories. And that's something that I saw in Missouri Photo Workshop. One of the most beautiful things about the Missouri Photo Workshop was at the very end, when the entire community came together to witness each other, and to have the physical prints in a stadium, and to have people who might have never talked to each other, never even glanced, you know, a second glance towards one another, just have a moment to witness each other's very personal life, even if just for a moment. Like, I was literally bawling in a corner. You can ask Brandon Bell or anyone else who went that last year. I was bawling in a corner because it was like that very physical space where somebody had a reaction or a moment of empathy towards their neighbor, quite literally, in their community, but they were there physically to encounter one another and to have that moment of connection. And I think that that is so beautiful. I mean, that's really, to me, like next level for photojournalism, like creating spaces where people can come witness each other's stories with empathy and no judgment, but presently with one another. Community building right then and there.
I think in this country specifically, I really can't speak for places outside of the U.S., but we're so used to talking about the value of anything based on how it can be commoditized, and that if it can't be, then its value is sort of somehow diminished. And I think it's a disservice to anything, but especially photography and photojournalism, if you strictly look at it through that filter, because you really miss out on why you and so many other people remain so passionate about it, and, you know, come hell or high water, are still going to do it. You know, there's something driving it far beyond, you know, its monetary value. Still need to make a living, but you know, it's being driven by something far more powerful.
Absolutely. And I mean, I am definitely aware that I'm in a very lucky position to have a staff job. I mean, I don't even really know how it happened, to be perfectly honest with you. Shout out to Maria de Jesus and PPA president, because she was like, get over here right now. And I was like, okay, you got it. But again, like that community, like they just keeping us all going, essentially. But yeah, the physical spaces, that's my goal, even within newsrooms.
So my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone. Someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. For who would that one photographer be and why?
This is so hard. This is a very hard question. There's so many people. I would have to say someone who I think will just make for a great conversation and whose heart is above and beyond in the right place is Sebastián Hidalgo from Chicago, Illinois.
Tell me about him.
Sebastián Hidalgo is, for me, what really struck me about him is like he's so studious. Like he is dedicating his life to really going about caring for the people that he photographs and that he writes about. His main thing is, like, how are we not re-traumatizing people simply by doing this work? And I think that's so important for us as journalists to learn. Like, how do we really engage with people from a place that isn't re-traumatizing and that is really one of care, like really caring for people. And it shows in his work, and it shows in how he works. And I think that he's really on to something as far as a new way of being on the ground.
Oh, thank you for that, Raquel. And thank you for making time for me today.
Thank you for making time for me. It's an honor.
Thanks to Raquel for joining us today. Find out more about her and her work by visiting RaquelNatalicchio.com. And if you're a fan of our show, we encourage you to write reviews on the podcast platform of your choice and share your favorite episodes on social networks, be it Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And if you'd like to support us financially, you can make contributions via PayPal or Patreon. Thanks to Tracy Adams, Raphael Hugh, Mark H. Berger, and Maurice Bellinger for their generous contributions. We've recently relaunched our newsletter. By signing up on our website, you'll receive updates on everything related to TCF, as well as book recommendations, announcements for special events and workshops from us and some of our guests. And if you're having trouble finding all our episodes on your preferred podcast service, you can download the Candid Frame app for Apple iOS and Android. Thanks to your generosity, the app is free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor. You can find at theothermartintaylor.com. And our show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And I'm Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.